that you allow him to be vulnerable as well as strong. How do you start preparing for this?
Well, you sort of build the character from the ground up, especially when you're playing a historical character.
Yes.
You're looking for all the information you can find, tapes, books, people who knew the person, if it's recent enough history.
Did you talk to people that knew him?
Oh, yeah. I mean, that was one of the huge benefits of shooting in Botswana
How
as
did
well.
that inform the performance?
Well, hugely. I mean, one of the hazardous things about playing a true life character is everyone's going to have an opinion, especially if they're fairly well known. Even if they're not that well known, there are people who are invested in the history, invested in the legacy of that person in a very real way. You have to just accept at some point that you're not going to please everyone, but you need the information. You need to know. And then what I find you have to do is at some point trust that it's all in there, and then make yourself available to interact and react as a human being within scenes. Because if I prepare everything I'm going to do, I don't know what Rosamund as Ruth Williams is going to do in a scene. So if I've decided everything about that character, I don't leave myself emotionally available to react in a way that we as human beings recognize, because when we're having a conversation, often we don't know what the person's going to say. And that's what elicits true reactions, true interaction when you watch it on film. So you prepare as much as you can, and then you hopefully leave yourself open to be human within the scenes.
With Rosamund as your wife, how did that relationship come about? How did you go after her for this role of Ruth?
Well, Rosamund and I had worked together. We did a film called Jack Reacher together. And, anyone who's seen that film will know that we have a very different relationship in that film. I tase her in a lift,
yes.
Actually, as she likes to remind me, and she was actually several months pregnant when I did that to her. But I've always enjoyed her as an actress. I really enjoyed her as a person in our interaction.
Well, there's so much chemistry between the two of you.
But that's something you can never know is
right.
going to happen.
Yes.
We know we like each other. We know that I think she's a great actress, and so I wanted her for the role. But the thing that gave me a hope that we would have good chemistry was her reaction when I first sent her the project. What happened is that I literally sent her some images of Ruth and Seretse, black and white images, just to pique her interest. And I sent them to her by email, and within an hour, she wrote me back saying, "I'm here in floods of tears looking at these images. Who are these people? Tell me more." And then I sent her the script, and within about a week or two, she was on the project. And that, in Hollywood, that does not happen. An actress who's just been nominated for an Oscar, you couldn't be more hot if she tried to just go, "I'm doing this, come what may." And that reaction that she had suggested to me that this was going to be a kindred spirit, because I had had a similar reaction years earlier of, who are these people? I've just got to tell their story. And that was what happened on the set. We were just so impassioned about telling the story of their love, who they were, what they achieved. And I think that's what bonded us, in a sense, in the making of the film that translates off the screen.
I believe you mentioned that you related this couple with King and Coretta in terms of how they grounded each other.
Yeah, I mean, look, any couple who are going to go through what Ruth and Seretse did, or what Dr. King and Coretta did, it takes a lot to stay together. Those are the kind of pressures that very few people ever have to endure. The correlation with playing both roles is that in both instances, both Seretse's wife and Dr. King's wife without them, what they went on to achieve simply would not have happened. Coretta was very much the one who introduced Dr. King to civil rights and the import of civil rights. In terms of Ruth and Seretse, I think what Botswana went on to become as a country post their marriage would not have been the case without the struggle they faced. I mean, Botswana is one of the success stories of Africa because the prejudice they faced made Seretse determined, once he became president, the first democratically elected president, to not allow, the West to control Botswana's resources. So they own the bulk of their resources, which is, I think very few other African countries can say that. So in both instances, I'm a big lover of love. I'm an unashamed romantic, and to see love not only be something that holds two people together, but has ramifications beyond those two people, I think is a really beautiful thing, and that was the case with those two sets of couples.
What was the most difficult part of filming this?
Well, for me personally, I mean, as I never get to do films in this accent. I'm always playing someone completely different to me, from a different background, from a different culture, and I've had the blessing, which has been trepidatious, of shooting those projects, playing those characters in front of the people who are from the place. And that is just so terrifying. I mean, playing Dr. King in Atlanta, playing Robert Katende in Uganda, playing Seretse Khama in Botswana. So, you're always greeted with suspicion and bewilderment, and you have to win people over. And that is doubly so the case when you then have to go in front of people and give a speech, as someone who is beloved by them, someone who is part of their history. And you can feel it, the first time you step on a podium or in like this, where there were thousands of people there when I gave this speech appealing to them for my wife. And
that's a gorgeous speech. I love that. So
thank
one
you.
of my favorite scenes.
Thank you very much. Well, if that didn't work, we were dead. If you gave that speech and people were going, what? So that was probably one of the things I had to prepare for the most.
Now, some of the places were gone when you shot there, so you had to restore some places or find alternate spaces.
Yeah, well, again, one of the blessings of getting to shoot in Botswana, the house that we shot in, Ruth and Seretse's house,
that was actually their
that's
house.
the exact house they lived in. It was going to ruin, it was overgrown, and no one even related it to them. We, who had been doing all this research on them, knew where the house was, had images of the house. When we found it, the people who live around it, a factory had been built across the street. It was just going to waste. They didn't even know who had lived there. And so we ended up restoring it, and that was an incredible experience to play those scenes in that house. The hospital where Rosamund gives birth to their first daughter is the exact hospital where that happened. And so again, you're with these films, you're always looking for as much opportunity for authenticity as you can.
Yes.
Being in the actual place, there's just a magic in the air that brings a layer that money can't buy.
Now, you're saying that when you grew up watching TV, watching films, you didn't see yourself in those films. Now, producing this piece, starring in it, if you were like your young self, what would you say watching this film?
Well, I think if I were my 10-year-old self, 15-year-old self watching this, I think it would have validated who I am. Because what you see when you see Seretse Khama in this film is what I was surrounded by when I lived in Nigeria. My dad's a Nigerian prince. Yes, I did just say that, and it's true. But I grew up around men who have the self-possession that Seretse has, and men who love their wives and families the way he did and does in this film. But I never got to see that on film. When I saw Africans in movies set in Africa, they were always on the periphery of what I would argue should be their own story. It was often films steeped in poverty, degradation, the corruption of leaders, child soldiers, just the negative side of life, which of course exists and is not a lie, but it was so pervasive that I didn't feel like I was watching myself. I felt like I was watching something I recognize as an extension of a perpetual news story. But living in Africa didn't bear resemblance to what I was seeing. And then images of black masculinity that I saw were very stereotypical, very caricature. They fit into very specific molds, which were perpetuated time and again. I literally, I had to consistently go back to Sidney Poitier to see something that I recognized as black male dignity, in a sense. And it just made me perpetually fascinated by him as an individual, and why we weren't seeing more of that, So that's a sort of a long-winded way of saying, these films that I try to make, they are simply an extension of what I see to be true, of what someone who looks like me is and was through history, and we don't get to see. And I feel like cinema is such a powerful cultural tool. I truly believe it is one of the main means of breaking down prejudice, because I think a lot of prejudice is born out of fear and ignorance of how people who don't look like you or who are not from your culture live and who they are. The minute you gain an understanding through a complex depiction of who they are or rendering of who they are, I believe there is the opportunity to see yourself in someone else. And once you see how much alike we are than different, I truly believe some of the preconceptions that lead to prejudice get broken down, and there's a real chance at us being the global village that, I think deep down we would all love to be.
Absolutely. Thank you. Do we have